Hello.
Hi, Howard.
Hi, Director Hannon. How are you?
Good. Real quickly, I don't think we've begun the meeting yet. Before we begin the meeting, I hope Adrian's okay.
I hope so as well. He had been in contact for a couple days, and I haven't been able to hear back from him over the last 24 hours or so. So, scrambling a little bit here on our end, but most importantly, we hope he's doing all right.
Okay, let me find the. Okay, so I have the agenda up. It's just 12 now. Do we have a quorum? Should we wait a few more minutes? What's your suggestion?
We do not have a quorum, so we should wait a few minutes.
Yeah, I guess that's
whether we like it or not, we're waiting a few minutes. I think we're live. I'm still getting a hang of some of the logistics here, so
That's
I
okay.
think we're live. Just as a heads up.
No, I won't say anything that I'll feel sorry for. Howard, do we need to make any kind of an announcement as we're doing at our council meetings regarding the meeting remote, things of that nature?
I don't believe so. I think at this stage we are okay. I think with this sort of emergency remote needs, I think that is determined through the regular board meetings where we're making that declaration. So for
Okay,
the committee meeting,
I thought that might be the case, since this is a subcommittee of the board, that it probably doesn't need to be adopted, but I wanted to double check that just to make sure.
Yep, I believe that is correct. And certainly as a follow-up to this, I will make sure that we are properly complying, and just check with our general counsel.
Okay, good. So Councilmember McCarthy, nice to see you.
I need to apologize. I didn't know I was on this committee.
Well, welcome aboard.
So when Adrian called me to see if I could re-enlist, I was kind of like, hold on there, please. But I came on, I replaced our mayor after things had started. So I assumed she was on the committee. And given that we get a lot of emails from East Bay Community Energy, I probably scrolled through it and thought it was, thanks for inviting me, but I'm not going. So you'll see me more now.
Isn't it amazing what we do at the behest of our mayors?
Yes, yes.
Mayor Al Nagy.
Careful, we are public right now. So
No,
Good things we do at the behest.
No, I will
of our
never
mayor.
say anything disparaging against our mayor. Interestingly enough,
nor mine.
our mayor is the alternate for this committee, and so I'm happy to have him join us at any time.
Well, I actually think I'm technically the alternate for this committee.
Are you?
But I'm replacing my mayor. Yeah. It's all good.
It is all good.
Although I'm not up to speed. So I'll be doing a lot of listening, active listening here.
Well, one thing, and I'll give Howard a great deal of credit for this, and the other staff at EDCE, they go into great detail in the explanations, because we, as just not board members, but committee members, always have lots of questions about what does this really mean? And how can you make me understand this a little bit? And sometimes I may ask you to repeat it 2 or 3 times because it needs to sink in. So feel free to ask as many questions as you want and clarification as you want, because at the end of the day, that's our responsibility to make sure we understand the material.
Thank you.
Now, Howard, you look different. Did you shave off a mustache, or you now look 15 years younger, Howard?
I have. I think since our last FAT meeting, I decided to go a little clean shaven. That was a COVID specific look, and I figured, after a year and a half, it was time to maybe change it up a little bit. So shaved the mustache and cut the hair a little bit.
Well, when the Sharks get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, the tradition is, of course, you grow a beard for the Stanley Cup playoffs. So when the Sharks get into the playoffs, let's all just grow beards as would be customary, and we'll see how we do.
Thanks for the heads up. You'll see that the beard isn't quite so full, but I'll see what I can do for the sake of the Sharks.
And Doug, I don't know if we've met or have had a chance to chat. If we have, I apologize. What's your role with EDCE?
I am the modeler in chief. So I do a lot of the financial modeling that we'll be discussing today, and numbers that you see on like projected revenues often come from my hands.
Great. Well, welcome if I haven't had a chance to welcome you before.
Oh, thank you.
So Howard, what is it? Is it 3 make a quorum or more?
That is correct. 3. It's a 5-member committee, so we need 3. And I am getting emailed from Director Narum that she's having some trouble with the link. So at least we do have another member that is intending to join us. So let me just try to troubleshoot that.
And for clarity, we only need the quorum to start because I might have to leave a few minutes before 2 o'clock if we're still going that long.
I think we technically need the quorum to maintain the meeting.
And I don't think we're going to go. till
Okay.
2 o'clock.
Okay, because I need to leave about 1:45.
Sure. I say that as I'm probably one of the principal ones that asks the majority of these questions, but I'll try to keep my questions to a minimum. Are you up for re-election next year, Councilmember McCarthy?
I'm just not even finishing my first year.
Oh, congratulations,
no.
by the way.
Yes, yeah.
Congratulations. Now, does you're from the city of Berkeley, as I recall?
Piedmont.
Oh, Piedmont, I apologize.
That's all right. Don't apologize. That's fine.
Do you have term limits in Piedmont?
2 terms. Yeah. 2 4-year
terms.
terms. So 8 years. Yeah.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. It appears we now have a quorum.
Hi, Kathy.
Hello, I'm sorry, didn't get my backdrop there changed.
My apologies if you're having any issues with the link there, Director Narum, but hopefully it all worked out here.
Yeah, I was getting weird screens from Zoom that I don't normally get. So I'm not sure it was you, just the gremlins in my internet.
Well, it's funny, Councilmember, sometimes I think I see the link for a meeting that's coming up, and then all of a sudden I can't find it in my email. And I thought, well, maybe I didn't get a link. And, we get so many links to so many meetings. It's
Yeah.
hard to remember which ones we get, which ones we don't get. And oftentimes I'm saying, could you resend that link to me? Because I don't remember either getting it or I can't find it. And rather than try to look for it, I just simply ask them to send it again. So, Howard, I think we're okay to go ahead and proceed.
Yes, that is right. We have a quorum now. I know that we are expecting Director Pcie, but certainly we can get started now without him.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call the Finance and Procurement meeting to order, today being November the 12th, and ask that we take roll call, please.
Great. City of Piedmont,
Present.
City of Hayward, absent. City of Pleasanton,
Present,
City of Newark,
Here,
and Alameda County is absent.
okay. Howard, I don't have the agenda right in front of me on the Zoom screen. My recollection is the next item on the agenda is the seeking a adoption of the approval of the minutes. What was the date on that hearing?
Typically, we do public comment prior to
Okay.
approval of minutes.
Great.
And I should just note that while we do have a sort of an online speaker slip process due to me taking this over under this sort of impromptu clerking responsibility, I don't have access to that. So I would ask that if there are any public comments to really raise your hand, that would be the best way for me to be notified of it.
Great. And so what I'll do, Howard, is I will ask for public comments for any member of the public that would like to comment on any item that is not on the agenda, to raise your hand or notify staff that you're wishing to make a comment. Again, these would be for items not on the agenda. And I'll ask Howard if there's anyone that's indicating that they'd like to comment.
At this stage, no hands raised.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. And then now I will move on to the next agenda item, which is typically the approval of the minutes from the meeting on, Howard, what date was that?
That was a meeting from Friday, September 10th, 2021.
Great. So I'll look for a motion and acceptance of the minutes from that date. I'll go ahead and make the motion that we adopt those minutes.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Kathy. We need a roll call vote on this, please.
Let's see, City of Piedmont.
I have to abstain because I was not there.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, and certainly Kathy and Councilmember McCarthy, correct me if I'm wrong. I think members that were not at a meeting can still vote in adopting the minutes from a meeting to which they were not able to attend or did not attend. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding. And an abstention is in essence a yes vote.
So because my worry is that if we only have the two of us, then we won't be
Right.
able to adopt the minutes.
I forgive me, but I'm not comfortable doing that since I wasn't at the meeting. Can we just move that agenda item to towards the end of the meeting so that the next person coming in will give you your quorum?
Sure, we
On
can do
that
that.
Thank
And Howard, if we don't have that, we'll simply carry this item over to our next meeting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, great. So we do not have a passage on the minutes because we don't have sufficient number of folks to be able to vote. Are there any public comments on the minutes from anyone in attendance, Howard?
I'm not seeing any hands raised or comments on this item.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this item anyway, either at the end of the meeting or at our next meeting anyway. So folks will have an opportunity to comment at that time if they wish to do so. Okay, now to regular business. Howard, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the item.
Great. The next item number 4 is PCI and rate forecast. Let me share my screen, and then my colleague here with us, Doug Allen, will be presenting on this.
And Doug, let me ask you this as you make the presentation. Are you okay with board members asking questions as you go through the different slides, or would you prefer that we wait until the presentation is completed? I prefer to ask questions during the slide presentation. Otherwise, I forget what the question might be, or it might not make sense once we get through the entire PowerPoint. What's your request?
Yeah, I would say, given kind of there's a lot of complexity in the slides that we're going through, so it is probably best to ask during the slides. I don't want to get too far ahead and then kind of compound misunderstanding on misunderstanding. So feel free to speak up, and I will try to make sure to leave a little bit of time in between each slide so that we can address those issues as they arise.
Great. And board members, I'm not a big, this is a committee meeting, so I'm not looking for you to have to raise a hand or this or that. Just if you have a question, either during the slide presentation itself or as Doug mentioned at the end of the slide itself, if you have a question, just go ahead and feel free to identify yourself and go ahead and ask your question. All right, go ahead, Doug.
Okay. Make sure I can see Howard's screen.
And I'll just make two quick notes. One is there are only 2 kind of substantial items, this one and the next one is just on energy hedges. So you have a sort of sense of timing. I think there's ample time to kind of discuss as you'd like. And the other thing is, because I'm sort of multitasking with a responsibility I don't typically have, oftentimes people raise their hands, but I would just ask you all to just interrupt the dialogue, just so I'm not needing to look at multiple screens. I don't want to miss anyone if you have a question that comes up.
Yes.
Howard, if you'd prefer, I have the slides up on my screen and could take over the movement.
If it's easier for you, Doug, but I have no issues. You know, it's not that many slides or anything like that. So
I think it might be easier for me so I can point with my mouse. So.
Okay, great. Well, then I will stop share and I will have you take that over so it's easier for you to navigate.
All right. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. All right. So Howard asked me to come in today to give kind of a brief update on the Pcia calculation, the recent PG&E filing regarding that Pcia calculation, and some of the things that we are thinking about as we look forward to not just 2022, which is the year covered by the recent filing, but also as we move into 2023. So I'm going to start really briefly with kind of a summary of a Pcia calculation, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we saw in PG&E's November update that was filed at the beginning of this week. The numbers, just some notes. as we're talking through this, we tried to make it so that the numbers are very similar to those that you would see if you looked through the filing, but there's tried to distill a lot of kind of complexity down into a more digestible form. So we use some representative values, and these are not taken to be exact, but they should be directionally certainly correct and actually very close to the values that you see out of the filing. So, that's that first bullet. Values are kind of rounded at times to promote readability, but they're generally consistent with current expectations. The numbers that I will show you for the 2021 PCIA values, so the calculations that covered this year, the forecast power price from November 2020 came in at about $40 a megawatt hour. And what we're seeing throughout 2021 is something closer to $50 a megawatt hour. So 2021 had higher power prices than expected. And then we just got the values for the 2022 values. And the forecast power price that they're showing for next year is at $70 a megawatt hour. So that is a lot higher than we had seen in 2021. And in the, they do a June filing that kind of predicts what this November filing will look like, and the numbers were a lot lower there.
I'll just note too, something for context that I think would be valuable is one thing is in the next item, we will be talking about sort of energy hedges and a little bit more about energy market volatility. But as a backdrop for you, the reason why we're presenting this item, one is just the mechanics of this are of course important, related to sort of how PCI is set, how it's forecasted, and what the true up process is. And then similarly for rates, how it is set and what the true up process looks like. And ultimately it sort of creates a headroom for us to operate from a financial standpoint. So that's an important methodology to understand. And that's what Doug's of course going to walk through. But the other important reason why we wanted to raise this for FAP right now is just because we are seeing somewhat unprecedented levels of volatility in the market, mostly volatility driving prices up. So we're seeing near historically high prices right now. That of course has a lot of implications both for rates as well as for PCIA. So all that more important right now as we're seeing some new numbers come in for projections for 2022 to keep the FAP committee updated, because it will ultimately have implications from a financial standpoint, of course.
Yep. Okay.
Director Hannon, it looks like you're speaking, but you're muted.
I am sorry about that. Doug, I'm always one to want to translate some of this financial information down to what it would look like at a consumer level. And is that something you'll talk about kind of later on in the PowerPoint? Or is that something where you can describe the forecast was 40, the realized cost is 50, and at the end of the day, that translates into X cost to our typical customer? Is that something that you can describe now or something you will describe later on in the presentation?
I think, let me get to the next set of slides. I think that should be how I'm setting this up.
Perfect.
And all of these numbers, we're talking about dollars per megawatt hour on this slide, but the slides that I'll show next really try to bring it down to the consumer level and say in terms of kind of their rates. So the rate that they would see on their bill per kWh that they consume.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a lot of information on this slide. I will try to walk through it very slowly. Let's start with this graph in the upper right shows how they calculate the PCIA on a kind of customer level for 2021. And so this was last November 2020. We got a forecast, and this is simplified, but the general idea is for the PCIA resources, there's about 9 cents per kWh of cost. And then what PG&E says is, okay, we paid 9 cents per kWh for these resources, but they were worth 4 cents per kWh in the market. And so what EBCE customers have to pay as part of the power charge indifference adjustment is 5 cents per kWh to PG&E for entering into that contract on their behalf while they were customers. So this is what we saw, pretty much a high level approximation. This is what we saw last November. They had us at about 5 cents per kWh. Then there is also the calculation in this lower left hand right here of the PG&E rate that they charge for customers, which includes both the PG&E bundled customers pay PCIA, but there's also the kind of energy cost. So what we see is this ERA fixed cost here, plus the energy forecast, actually gives you, there's some part of it, the ERA costs and the costs that determine rates that are not driven by energy costs. There's some parts that are driven by energy costs, and then PG&E kind of collects the total of the two. So again, in 2021, what we saw was between these two, it added up to about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So we saw the difference between what PG&E was charging and the forecast PCIA obligation was about 5 cents. So we had 5 cents per kWh to go out and procure for our customers. 2021, I think, was a pretty tight year, and we'll see that in some of the slides going forward. But that's at a high level, the kind of how they calculate both the generation rates and the PCIA in the forecast proceeding in 2020, which determined our rates and PCIA for this year. So given kind of the amount of information I went through, I'll pause right there.
One quick thing I'll just say is, because I know we always have questions about acronyms. So just a reminder, PCIA is Power Charge Indifference Adjustment, and ERA actually stands for Energy Resources Recovery Account. And that is really the process with which the IOUs, PG&E in this case, and the CPUC sets their rates.
And just for clarification, Howard, because I always want to make sure I'm correct in my assumptions, the PCIA, that's the fee that we in EBCE customers are paying, in essence, back to PG&E for the capital costs for them to provide the lines and everything associated with the delivery of the energy. Is that a fair statement?
Not quite.
Okay.
The PCIA is just associated with energy procurement, wholesale energy procurement.
Okay.
It is associated with the stranded costs that
Okay.
PG&E has due to their, either they have PPAs or utility-owned generation, but investments they had made on behalf of their customers when they were their customers. And since those customers have departed and gone to CCAs, in our case, of course, EBCE, there is a PCIA, which is an adjustment that customers still continue to pay to PG&E for these stranded costs.
And is that something, Howard, that is kind of like an amortization schedule that at some point in the future, EBCE customers will no longer be responsible for PCIA because those contracts have now all been satisfied?
That is correct. So at some stage in time in the future, these contracts will expire. Their utility-owned generation will, use up their useful life. And so over a longer period of time, PCIA should trend down and go away, ultimately when these resources go away as well. And this is, I'll just note, there's been a lot of analysis, largely spearheaded by Doug, to evaluate what exactly those resources are, what's the schedule for that. It can be somewhat lumpy, as you can imagine. It's not as if every year there's a steady, sort of termination or expiration of some of those contracts. And I think in a future meeting, we will plan to actually cover some details on those resources specifically.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that kind of the high level description of the 2021 forecast? Okay.
Was there a question from Director Narum? I see maybe you're speaking, but I think you're muted.
I'm a little confused then. I thought that part of the PCIA was basically paying PG&E for using the transmission lines to get the energy into our homes. And so I'm not clear why that cost would go away.
PCIA does not cover the cost of transmission lines. So PCIA is strictly focused on wholesale energy procurement, and the T&D costs, meter costs, and things like that sit separate from that, entirely separate from PCIA. So those costs certainly are there. Our customers pay those costs, whether they be our customers or PG&E customers, they pay those same T&D costs, but that is wholly separate from PCIA itself.
So then where would those costs be?
they sit under a separate line item within the electricity bill, specifically related to T&D costs.
Okay,
So they are very much so in the bill. That's not something that we are explicitly covering for this purpose here.
okay. All right.
Just to quickly follow up on Kathy's question, we don't pay as EBCE customers, we don't pay any more for T&D than a regular PG&E customer would pay themselves.
That is correct. They are identical between an EBCE customer and a PG&E customer, what the T&D costs are. That's right.
Thank you.
Okay. So the 2021 forecast values that we see on the left side of this screen are what PG&E filed in last November. What happens in the November update to the PCIA process in 2021, the filing that was released at the beginning of this week, is they go back and they look at, okay, we had forecasted all these values, but here's what actually materialized. And so what we're seeing, instead of, you see the 4 cents that was forecasted here, instead we saw energy come in at about 5 cents per kWh, or $50 a megawatt hour. So where you should have seen a PCIA of, where they filed a PCIA of 5 cents per kWh, since energy was actually more expensive, those resources were more valuable, PG&E was able to recover more of their costs through the market. The actual PCIA obligation for customers should have been lower last year. It should have only been 4 cents because they were getting 5 cents back from the market. And so that outstanding balance goes into a kind of carryover account that lowers our PCIA next year. What we see on the kind of PG&E generation rate side is a similar effect. They had that the fixed portion stays the same, but where they thought they were going to be able to go out and buy energy for 4 cents per kWh all year, instead they had to pay 5 cents. So to truly recover their costs, they should have been charging an extra cent per kWh. And then, so their customers all owe them a little bit more money to cover their costs from last year. So what we have after seeing the energy prices in 2021 is a situation where customers paid about 1 cent extra in PCIA, the EBCE customers. And then because energy prices came in higher, bundled customers paid about 1 cent too little. And that will get rolled into the next year's forecast, and I'll show that on the next slide, to kind of true that up. And they do that kind of year over year. Any questions there before I move on? Okay. So what that means is this was the filing that we saw on Monday that looks ahead to 2022 and says, okay, here's our calculation for the PCIA rates, and here's our calculation for the generation rates that we're going to be charging our customers. Over the course of 2022, to predict the value of the energy in 2022, the CPUC looks at energy price forwards, expected energy prices for next year during the month of October. And what we saw was about where, this year we had about 50. Next year, we're looking at $70 or 7 cents per kWh for that energy. So on the PCIA side, that's actually a little bit of a boon to us. More valuable energy means that we're paying less to kind of cover the cost of those expensive resources. On top of that, we have this year one true up is a little bit of a credit. So, we had the 9 cents per kWh. You say, oh, we can sell all that energy for 7 cents per kWh, plus PCIA customers paid 1 cent too much last year. And so they get that credit back this year. And so what we see as a result is we are now looking at PCIA next year of somewhere in the range of 1 cent per kWh. It was between 4 and 5 during 2021. We're going down to closer to 1 cent next year. At the same time, PG&E is making a filing about here's how we're setting our rates for our bundled customers next year, which takes, this fixed cost portion, adds this kind of more expensive 7 cents per kWh energy on top of it, plus the 1 cent per kWh that they have to carry over from this year to recoup their undercharging. And we see that rates next year are expected to go up to about 14 cents per kilowatt hour. If you remember from our last slide, we had 10 cents per kilowatt hour this year. And now PG&E's filing indicates that the average customer will pay 14 cents per kilowatt hour this next year. So where in 2021, our operations this year, our headroom, the amount we have to spend on energy before we start, with the PCIA, before we start not collecting our rates, was about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Whereas when we look at it next year, it's really shot up. We have 13 cents to spend per kWh next year. So that's kind of the current state of things. And it's helpful to think of the PCIA as more of a 2-year process, because you have the projected in 1 year and then you kind of true up the next year. So those costs carry over into the next year. But by the end of next year, all of the 2021 costs should have been dealt with. And then we're looking at, 2022 will be dealt with in 2022 and 2023. Any questions before I move on to some of the projections that we're looking at?
And when you talk about projections, Doug, are you looking at more of a 5-year down the road because of the volatility in the energy market? Do they look at it over a longer period of time based on historical data? Because this is energy that's already been either purchased or they have contracts for. So aren't they able to look beyond a 2-year cycle to kind of get a indication as to where the pricing may be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road?
So they certainly could, but the filings that PG&E makes available to us and that are filed with the CPUC only cover 1 year. So we have worked with CalCCA, and I have built some tools internally that allow us to look out a little farther and run some scenarios about how changes in power prices might affect the future. But in terms of kind of filed data from PG&E, we're going 1 year at a time. So we get one filing in June that says, here's what we think next year will look like. Then we get one filing in November that says, we're pretty sure this is what next year will look like.
And I'll just note, that's PG&E's obligation is only to do that sort of 1 year ahead forecast. We, of course, to Doug's point, one of the reasons why we have Doug is he has really built a lot of tools and models for us internally to extend that forecast. And as you noted, we're working closely with CalCCA on that as well. I think an important factor to understand is it is very difficult to really forecast these things accurately multiple years into the future, because they are really largely dependent on energy market prices. And so obviously no one really has a great ability to predict energy market prices. To your point, Director Hannon, their contracts are done. So why couldn't we, closely evaluate at least portions of that? And I think that's partially true. So when you look at this graph here, the PCIA cost bar, that sort of orangish colored bar, some of those costs are very well established because they're fixed price PPAs, and you can add that up. And then some of those costs are also established because they're related to UOG. But then some of those costs are not well established. They're variable costs that may be associated with actual natural gas prices. So there are components of that 9 cents per kilowatt hour that absolutely are variable. And as we all know, this year, natural gas prices are more than kind of 2x than they were a year ago. So there is quite a bit of unpredictability with certain components of that. And then, of course, that column over the projected value, that is fully dependent on energy market prices. So your ability to project that is very, very difficult. It really depends on what are the energy. And again, we'll touch on some of the energy market volatility that we're seeing, so you can kind of see historically what kind of volatility we actually see and get a better sense of why that number shifts up and down in a less predictable manner.
Thank you.
I have a question too. So when you say the 2022 headroom is 13 cents a kilowatt hour, does that mean simplistically that that's what EBCE has to work with given our value proposition? maintaining our value proposition to cover all our costs, both for the energy and for, the overhead?
Generally speaking, yes. This is just so, just so we're sort of clear, this is somewhat illustrative. So, they are indicative of where we think things will head, but they're not very precise. I think this exercise is more intended to show you the methodology and talk about the dynamics of what happens year to year between a forecast and a true-up process. And so I don't want to fully rely on that 13 cents for your expectations of, oh, this is exactly what our headroom is. There's still a lot of refinement and moving around some of those numbers. And for the sake of this exercise, we actually just simplistically rounded a whole bunch of things, so it's easier to sort of follow. So I think directionally, yes, we absolutely are seeing a significant increase in that headroom projection for 2022, but don't hold us to that 13 cents exactly. And then the other thing I'll just note is we're really focused on brown power energy prices for the sake of this discussion. There are certainly other energy products that can have volatility in them, such as resource adequacy, RPS value, that can also drive changes in there. But for the sake of this discussion, we wanted to isolate one of the largest components, which is brown power energy, and just talk through that so we can really sort of highlight the mechanics and the methodology.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, so that's kind of the current state of things. And one of the things I think we really wanted to get out of this discussion was not just explaining the current state of things and the mechanics, but also walking through what are kind of the two ways that this could go in the coming year. So,
and Doug, actually, one other thing actually on that exact point, if you can go back one more slide. One thing I want to highlight as we're going into this next section is we are seeing energy prices at sort of historically high levels. And to your exact question, Director Narum, that's a pretty significant headroom, 13 cents that we're forecasting for 2022 relative to the roughly 5 cents that we had in 2021. As Doug noted, 5 cents was a particular tight year. So 2021 was a very, very tight year. I think prior to 2021, we were seeing healthier levels of headroom, sort of in between 5 cents and 13 cents, just to sort of level set on as to sort of what we've seen historically. And I think one of the reasons why we want to do this review specifically is that what the projections show right now for 2022 reflect that it should be a very strong financial year for EBC, which is of course great. But what Doug will soon go after, we'll soon cover here are a couple scenarios of what could happen in 2023 to give you a sense of the type of volatility you have to manage through and why 13 cents is great, but we may want to reserve significant amounts of that money for future years. And this is all preliminary, just to sort of talk through the mechanics. Obviously, as rates are actually set, we'll likely take an item to the full board in January as we get that update and provide a fuller update actually on our specific budget and give you a better sense of what that means. But this is more about learning methodology and everything.
So just as a follow-up to that, I think I heard that Doug is going to be doing some sensitivity maybe around that 13 cents. Because as you can imagine, as I'll speak for myself, when I hear there's money potentially available, my head starts spinning with ideas of how to spend it. And that probably isn't quite the right thing to be doing here, to be fiscally prudent.
I think the next few slides will give you a very good illustration of why that is not the case. So over to you, Doug.
yeah, and I think just the last thing that I would like to point out is, when we look at these true ups, this is, while there's volatility in the energy market, I think it's useful to point out that volatility is kind of doubled when we look at kind of the interplay between PCIA and PG&E's generation rates, because that higher than expected energy price in 2021 led to a true up that reduces PCIA while increasing the generation rate. So you see that kind of doubling effect. And that's what in the next slides we'll go into and look at. Okay, that's where you might need to start being a little cautious about big rebounds. So we're going to talk about two scenarios that I've looked at. The first is scenario one, where power prices continue to increase. So where, and now, the 2022 filing that was released in November, we're going to assume that that's kind of done with. And those numbers are what PG&E files, and look at what actually happens in 2022 and what that implies for us in 2023. So again, values are rounded. These 2022 PCIA values that I'm showing assume, consistent with what we've seen in this recent filing, the $70 per megawatt hour coming from PG&E on the expected power price. And then we look at, well, what if the power price actually comes in at $80 a megawatt hour and it stays at $80 a megawatt hour for the 2023 filing as well. So.
And one other comment, just to level set on context, $80 is astronomically high. Our historical price annually for the last 10 years is about $40. This year was about $50. So when we say $70, $80 projections, that's what I'm referring to as we are seeing extreme volatility and high energy prices. So I think this is absolutely right to say this is hypothetical. We don't know if that's what it will be, but I will say that, the industry says there's a lot of upward pressure on prices.
Okay. So we have a similar kind of buildup before, but what we see now is we've added in the true ups for the 2022 forecast. So again, we see PCIA costs, you've got 7 cents is the energy price. You got an extra 1 cent for the true up from 2021, which gives us that forecast PCIA obligation of, 1 cent per kWh. Similar, this should be, the same as the slide we were just looking at. There are fixed costs, 6 cents. The energy forecast is 7 cents. Then you got the true up of 1 cent. So again, this is where we get that 13-cent headroom number that we saw before. And now we're looking, what happens if, an actuals in 2022 is kind of a hypothetical actual, but what happens if instead of being 7 cents a kWh, power actually comes in at 8 cents per kWh. And what we see is where PCIA should have been 1 cent. Instead, it should be 0 cents because we got the 8 cents in value plus the 1 cent true up, which means once again, consumers paid 1 cent too much for their energy. Similarly, it's kind of the same dynamics as we saw in the last slide on the rate side. They should have been paying 15 cents. They did pay 14 cents. And there's that true up. Any questions there? Okay. So 2022 headroom, we have at about 13 cents. And then taking that into 2023, this would be the filing that we would expect to see about a year from now if looks like power prices are going to continue at about that 8 cents a megawatt hour, or sorry, $80 a megawatt hour or 8 cents per kWh. We might see PCIA completely go away because you got the 9 cents of cost, you got the 8 cents projected value, but that carryover from 2022, you could see 0 cents. At the same time, you see that, that double effect I was talking about last time would drive generation rates even higher, and we would see our headroom go up even further. That's, again, as Howard was talking about, this is in the context of historically high power prices. And you do have, I want to make sure remind people, we're talking only about the revenue side of things. So this does not reflect kind of the increased cost. We have more money to spend on energy, but there might also be additional costs because the market is going up. So that's kind of if power prices continue to increase, we continue to see headroom go up. Hopefully we can, because of our hedges and our the smart people on the procurement team, meet those goals. And scenario one is something to keep track of, but it's not, I would say, kind of scary. Scenario two looks at, well, what if power prices actually kind of came back down in 2022 and returned to a lower level in 2023? So we see, and we have the filing, the 2022 PCIA filing had this $70 a megawatt hour number. What if next year we see it drop down to 50? And in the forecast that we're looking at the year after that, it's it's expected to be $40 a megawatt hour. So we return to kind of our historic average prices. That's where this kind of double impact of the PCIA and generation rates gets really kind of interesting, right? So again, this one's not new. We got the headroom of 13 cents, but because power prices came in at $50, you got $50 a megawatt hour plus that true up. So instead of this 8 cents of kilowatt hours that got us down to 1, what we should have paid in 2022 was 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And so our customers have a kind of 2 cents per kWh outstanding balance that is going to come back on their bill in 2023. Meanwhile, on the flip side, on the generation rates, again, they charged 14 cents a kWh to their customers, but because energy was a little cheaper, they should have charged less, and we have an outstanding balance again. Any questions there?
So when you say it comes back to the customer, it comes back to the customer in the form of a monthly credit to their bill?
No, it comes back in the true up for the next year. So in the filing for 2023, they will say, actually, we collected not enough PCIA in 2022. So we need to add on and collect more in 2023 to make up for that shortfall. So it will be kind of spread across that whole period. But that's where, within 2 windows, all of the costs should be, within the 2-year window, all of those costs should be recollected.
And I want to just make sure, Director Hannon, you use the word credit, which I usually take to mean a benefit to customers. This scenario, of course, is showing in prior scenarios, we were talking about really a benefit customers where, in the sense that charges they were undercharged. And so, I'm sorry, they were overcharged. And so in the following year, there's a benefit because they paid too much. And so you actually get to reduce PCIA costs in the future, as an example. This scenario is actually they were undercharged. And so they actually owe more the following year. So this 2 cents is not a credit, so to speak. It is a deficit that they owe the following
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So,
excuse me, just like so said a different way, which I think you alluded to. We shouldn't get all excited about that 13 cents headway, and instead maybe need to be looking at possibly reserving some of it for the future year in the event that customers owe us more, so that we still can keep the value proposition of EBCE. Would that be a simplistic way of?
That's 100% what we're trying to communicate here. And actually, the next slide will help you.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't worry about it. So that's what we're seeing in this next slide is if we look forward to the 2023 forecast, where again, we have the PCIA cost coming in at the same amount, because power prices have softened, there's less value to offset those PCIA costs in 2023. Plus, because we were undercharged during 2022, we owe a little bit more. You could see, and these numbers are way more hypothetical than the previous ones we've seen. So the 2021, 2022 are about right. These are very kind of what could happen. So don't panic yet. But we do have, if you saw, oh man, the projected value really went down. Meanwhile, we owe from last year, you can see that, it's up at 7 cents per kWh, which is way higher than we've seen before. And again, on the flip side with the generation rates, we got, okay, here's the fixed cost, but the forecast for 2023 is low. So they're saying, to really recover our costs, we would only have to collect like 10 cents per kWh. But on top of that, you have the carryover from the year before. You have that bundled customers paid too much. And so they're getting that credit back. So that reduces it to, instead of that 10 cents, now we're down to 8 cents per kWh for rates. And that leaves us with a headroom, if we want to maintain our value proposition, of only 1 cent per kWh. Again, I want to be very clear. We chose very high level numbers, and there's kind of a lot more complexity to how these calculations actually bear out. But directionally, it's that kind of double effect that you see that really tends to squeeze things in the out years if there was under collections because of lower, or sorry, higher than that energy prices came in lower than expected. So I will pause there. Any other questions on this stuff? Okay. I think that is all that I have on the PCIA. I was just kind of setting up that, how are these things calculated, and what are the kind of the bounds, I would say, of what we should be thinking about heading into the 2022-2023 fiscal year.
My only last, I'm sorry, Kelly.
Go ahead.
My only last comment would be, again, I want to make sure we simplify this as much as we can, because we have a lot of folks that attend our meetings at the board, that I want to make sure that we're fully transparent in terms of what we anticipate these scenarios may cost our customers, our typical customers, on a monthly basis. I don't know if that's something that you could add to the slide, Doug, that showed, if these assumptions actually occur, this is what the customer will see in terms of an increase or decrease in the cost of the energy. Anything that we can do to simplify it so that folks understand what does it mean for my resident moving forward, I think would be helpful.
I'll just note on that particular point, Director Hannon, when we think about cost to residents, and first comment is we can absolutely include that information, but to give you a sense of that right now is, the cost to our residents are really reflected by the ERA rates. PCI is a subset of that, and the difference makes up our particular headroom to operate. And so cost to our customers are generally that dark blue ERA rates bar. In this case, it's showing 8 cents. That is in a scenario where power prices return to sort of historical average levels, and customers were overcharged the year before. I would say general operating conditions historically are probably in the 10 to 12 cent range. And so what we're right now projecting for 2022 is elevating above those historical levels by about 2 cents. And then following that is where we showed you kind of scenarios where actually, what if rates kept on going up? It could get up to sort of 15 cents. Or the flip side of that is a scenario where actually prices go back down. You can go drive down to as low as like 8 cents. And again, that 8 cents is based off of there being an under collection, an over collection the year before, drives that lower. So 10 to 12 cents is sort of like your kind of normal historical band. And right now what we're facing is that we're likely increasing above that. The good news is when rates go up, actually gives us more headroom. The bad news, of course, is our headroom is created by the fact that our customers are paying more money. So that's not good, but it's all reflective. It's a rising cost environment for power prices. And the next item we're going to get to here for today on the agenda is related to energy price. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's how it sort of transfers through to rates.
Thank you.
Okay, just to tag on to what Mr. Hannon said, I know that when I report this back to my folks, I think we're renewable 100. They pay maybe $6 additional a month for that. So am I going to be able to tell them what their increase or level out is going to be? Is that something I'll be able to tell them?
I would say for right now, this was purely indicative to talk about mechanics, help educate the board as to what, how does this work in terms of forecasting true up. I don't think we are at the stage of communicating anything to customers to say this is the expectation, because these are all preliminary numbers.
Okay.
We will actually get rate numbers towards the end of the year from PG&E that will allow us to reset rates. And then that's something that we can, of course, discuss more formally at the board level. I would view this all as more, we are trying to sort of show you what the mechanics and the methodology are. And the scenario of power prices go up directionally or power prices go down directionally, what does that do to headroom? So we have a sense of that. That was the purpose of this meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? I think Councilwoman Narum had a question.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Sort of following along with Director Hannon, it would seem perhaps helpful to talk at least in generalities about, some kind of reserve when we're, going to be above normal on the headroom, so that people aren't busy spending the money, so to speak, and that we're fiscally responsible to the ratepayers to buffer some of this if need be. And I have no idea with how that translates into, reserve, but it just seems like there ought to be something bracketed here with the reserve when the headwind is, above a certain amount for the following year.
I absolutely agree. I think, again, this was to sort of talk about methodology. I think this was a more in-depth conversation that we've had with most board members on exact PCI mechanics and how the true up and the forecast and true up sort of operate dynamically with one another year to year. My expectation is in January, maybe February, but most likely January, after the rates are actually formalized, we would come back and actually do a budget update with the board and sort of reflect how that the expected increased headroom will translate from a budget perspective. We also, of course, as Doug noted, this is just one side of it, right? This is the revenue side of it. We'll talk a little about the energy cost side of things in the next item, but in this environment, when we're projecting higher costs, which is creating more headroom, our costs are increasing absolutely, right? So that doesn't translate fully to our net position increasing in the same manner, because our energy costs to serve our customers are absolutely increasing. And so that's a very interesting, there are very interesting, unique dynamics happening right now that are setting historically high power prices. So we have to be able to operate. So that's a factor that we'll of course communicate to the board in terms of a budget update. And then to your exact point, absolutely, our expectation is that we need to reserve this money because you don't know what's going to happen in 2023. Based just off of these simplistic scenarios that Doug has modeled, which there could be many, many more, as we all know, you could see headroom going up to 15 cents, or you could see headroom going down to 1 cent. So we absolutely have to be fiscally responsible and reserve that money. I think that's the reason why we wanted to have this meeting, was to first talk about the dynamics and the methodology, so that when we do continue to resurface this in terms of budget, there's a greater understanding of what could happen the following year. And we'll want to review this, of course, most likely with the exec comm and the full board to a certain extent, but I know that this is our first opportunity to preview, is usually with the FAP, to make sure we get to this level of detail.
Okay, thank you.
And just a quick thank you, Doug, for looking at the various scenarios moving forward. We in government always don't do a very good job when it comes to looking at the different opportunities and scenarios that may occur, and sometimes are caught blindsided. So I appreciate the fact that you're looking at this from a variety of angles, so that we are in the best position to make sure that whatever pricing comes forward, at least we've looked at all different opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do it.
Howard, Doug, this is Nick. Sorry, I was in the attendee mode, so I just got upgraded here to a panelist. I think one thing that might be useful, and it's sort of here, but as we maybe bring this to the full board, it is really to look at, we've been trying to start looking at things really always over a 2-year cycle, because, that's the way sort of the PCIA works. It's sort of, you PCI, there's the forecast and the actual. So what might be useful here is to sort of, we have these scenarios and then almost sort of look at, like, if we were to just maintain our 1% value proposition, like what kind of a deficit would we run if we just said, we're just going to maintain our value proposition in 22 and our goal is to maintain the current value proposition 22 and 23, recognizing there's going to be an up and a down in these sort of scenarios, and maybe sort of look at, like, kind of what kind of a deficit you would expect to run if or how much incremental kind of revenue would you have under these scenarios if you sort of look at it as like a 2-year period instead of 1 year, then 1 year. Because I think that helps to speak to the question that's being asked here around, like, well, we don't want to spend the money in 22 when we need it in 23.
Right.
Yeah. And I'll just note the natural cycle of our fiscal period, because it's half of 1 year and half the next year, actually naturally mutes that, right? So let's bear in mind, when we talk about our financial budget, when we do an update in January, we're going to have half 2021 calendar year and half 2022. And as we've noted, 2021 is a very tight year. So you'll have a particularly soft half year and a particularly strong half year. So right there's some muting. I think it's it's very good how we have that balance naturally within a fiscal year period. But yes, I do agree with Nick's point. It's like we'll show this stuff on a multi-year basis to make sure that we're speaking to sort of the risk of headroom going up or down.
So, Doug, is that the end of the presentation on this particular item?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Howard, I'm going to ask if there's any attendees or folks that have questions regarding this item and look to see if there are any. If there are not, then we can move on to the next item.
There is one hand raised from Jim Lutz. So I will allow him to speak.
Thank you. Jim Lutz here. I thought you did a good job, and it's sort of counterintuitive that EBCE does better when the energy prices go up. And I thought you did a good job of explaining how that works on the PCIA. But I wanted to stress that EBCE, and particularly the board members, should be challenging the PCIA and making sure that the calculations of what goes into it goes away when it should, and that PG&E isn't playing games and trying to get money and harm CCAs because they don't think anybody's paying attention. And then that's sort of looking backwards, and then looking forwards. Another place to challenge the PCIA is the contracts that were put in place that the PCIA is to an exit fee so that we pay PG&E because they put in contracts in place to serve us. Those contracts should not cover EV charging or building electrification efforts, any electricity used for that, because those loads, the EV charging and heating and water heating from electricity, were not included in the contracts back when PG&E entered them, 10, 20 years ago. Nobody was thinking about that. So there's no way that they can be justified, the PCIA could be justified to be applied to new loads that were not even included in the forecasts back then. And that's all I have to say. And thank you.
Jim, thank you for your comments. And staff, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the PCIA charge, as was articulated during the meeting, is purely for the cost of the energy. And as I heard Doug say, I think in the near future, you will be coming back with kind of an idea as to how soon do we anticipate that the PCI obligation to which our customers are subject to will ultimately extinguish. Any corrections on my comment? Howard?
Nope, I think that's accurate. Yep.
Okay. Jim, thank you for your comment. Any other comments, Howard, from any other resident that might be listening in?
Nope. No other hands raised.
Great. Thank you for this information, Doug. Let's go ahead and move on. I want to be sensitive to Councilmember McCarthy. She indicated that she needs to leave at around 1:45. Do we anticipate that, minimizing questions as we have, we should be able to get through this next agenda item in that time period?
Yeah, I don't think that'll be a problem. This is really the only substantive remaining item other than just general announcements. So yeah, that should be fine. And I'll make sure that we move quickly through it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Howard.
So this is a good follow-up to the PCI conversation. This is specifically to our energy hedge review, and then speaking to some of the energy prices that we're seeing currently. So slide 2 here, let me just confirm everyone can see this okay? Great. Slide 2 shows our historical energy hedge performance for 2021. And so you can see in the blue bar is our actual hedge costs. Our orange bar is the actual NP15 price. And then the gray bar is a historical price, just to show you in context what historicals have been in the 2017 through current period, so recent history. And I will just note, you can see clearly where hedges have performed well, or blue bar have performed relative well to the orange bar. Usually they're pretty well in line. And you can see in February, and then as we get into the summer months, energy prices have been at very elevated levels. So I think this reflects that our hedges are certainly performing very well. That's just good. But it also reflects that we're in this rising energy cost environment that I've been touching on. And I know this was a prior request from our last FAT meeting, but was to try to quantify what that hedge, sort of value was to us. And so this is a relatively high level estimate of, how to quantify the performance of our hedges from this year alone, at least. So roughly $60 million based off of the fact that we have these hedges that have been generally in the money. That's it on this slide. And then moving on to this slide, this is really that same slide, but over the life of EBCE. So from January through October of this year, this is the same data. But wanted to just give you a sense of how that looks historically. So again, the orange bar reflects actual NP15, and you can see this is the current year. It's at very elevated levels. You can see about the last two prior years were much more modest, and then in 2018, early 2019, we saw some similarly elevated levels. This year, we've seen, a number of our sort of top 5 energy expense months. And there's a variety of reasons for this. I'll just comment on very quickly. On something like February, if you recall, February was the strange cold front that came in and had specific impacts to Texas, of all places. And that had ripple effects energy market wise to CAISO, actually. So in addition to the sort of cold front, also the sort of dynamic implications of sort of gas costs in other regions of the country can have meaningful impacts to California energy prices specifically. So that's what really drove this February condition. And I'll just note the historically high February, this was in 2019. This was that polar vortex that we had. So like many things, energy prices are weather driven. When you have an extreme cold snap, you're going to have rising energy prices. We saw that in February 2019. We saw that this year in February 2021. And then June through October, you'll see similarly elevated levels. Really, July through October see similarly elevated levels. This year, like many recent years, was another very hot year. We didn't see some of the same extreme weather conditions in our service territory per se, but historically hot summer in the Pacific Northwest in general, and most of the region of the West was still seeing near historical highs, or at least sort of top 5 average weather conditions for the year. So again, hot weather, that's one of the drivers of high energy prices. Drought conditions are a significant driver of energy prices as well, because we see large hydro production in California as well as potentially outside of California. But obviously the drought condition we're all very much so aware of this year, unfortunately, was also a contributing factor there. And then what I mentioned earlier today, natural gas pricing. So natural gas pricing has risen significantly over the last year. It has more than doubled from, sort of a very low historical running average there in sort of the $2 range for some number of years now. So increasing gas and oil prices are also a dynamic driving this. And then the last factor I would say is very California specific, but we are seeing a lot of natural gas units coming offline. So that is causing, potential capacity constraints. One of the things that we've talked about here in the FAP forum is we have requirements for incremental RA, resource adequacy. So we, as a load serving entity, have to go build new capacity. We're doing that largely through clean battery storage. But we're seeing, some of the implications of capacity constraints driving this increase in power prices as well. So sort of all those various dynamics. Moving on, this graph just shows a snapshot of average annual day ahead prices. LMP stands for locational marginal prices, just a fancy acronym for average prices that we're seeing. And you can see what that is year to year. So 2021 is over $50, and it is a historical high over the last 10 years. The last time, the second highest was in 2014, and that was, in the $46, $47 range. And the average here is $36. So this is a meaningful increase in 2021. And as Doug had presented in the last item, we are projecting in 2022, those levels will increase significantly. Obviously, it's very difficult to predict exactly where energy prices go. No one has a crystal ball here, but certainly the market is saying a lot of upward pressure on that pricing. The next few graphs really are just a reflection of that statement. We are seeing increasing forward costs significantly in 2022. We are seeing that further into 2023 as well, but not nearly as significant. So really it's a 2022 kind of short-term focus of that spike in energy costs, where about a year ago, it was around that kind of $40 level, which is in line with historical averages. And now we're seeing that close to that $70 level. And that's what PCI is forecasted off of. That's what we had sort of highlighted before, is you look at forward energy costs, and you do a projection of what that will mean, and that's how you set your PCIA. So based off of this rising trend, particularly over the last 3-4 months, or actually probably 4 or 5 months, we've seen a significant increase and some interesting volatility here as well, but setting it closer to that $70 line. This is for the full year 2022 forward costs. So it's just sort of showing that trend over time. This, the next two graphs are just a breakdown of a couple quarters in 2022. So very similar story. This is Q1, so this is January, February, March specifically. You can see a very similar trend, around that $40 level, increasing significantly over the last several months. And currently around that $70 mark. Interestingly, in that sort of October timeframe, really even spiked up to close to $90. So really significant upward pressure on pricing here on Q1 specifically. And then Q3, I've also highlighted here. This is the next graph. Again, very similar trend, so not a different story there. Q2 and Q4 tend to be much softer. Q2 in the spring months, temperatures are just very mild. And that's when you typically get the most large hydro production that you get all year, because the snowpack starts to melt. So those two things combined, Q2 is not nearly as interesting from a trend perspective. So honestly, we just wanted to highlight the volatility that we're seeing here, which that's why we showed Q1 and Q3 specifically here. So cold winter months, hot summer months, that's when you see that volatility in terms of actual power prices. And we saw that a little bit on the first couple slides, month to month, where we saw the month-to-month breakdowns. And obviously you can see that in forward costs are reflected in the same way. No surprise. For this graph, what I wanted to show is Q1 specifically, since that's the period that we're going to be entering in 2022, and just give you a sense of sort of hourly volatility and month-to-month volatility. So you can kind of get a sense, because we've simplified things a lot in all these various graphs with you on an annual or on a monthly basis, and that doesn't obviously tell the full story. When you look at serving load on an hourly basis, that's where you can see quite a bit of variability just within a single day or a single month, right? Prices, I think people are aware of this, but prices tend to bottom out in the middle of the day, where there tends to be a lot of solar production. That's the sort of the belly of the duck that we talk about in the duck curve. And then tends to spike in the early evening hours in that sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock time frame. People are home, the sun is setting, so your solar production rolls off. You start cranking up your heater, you start cranking up your AC in the summer months, and just using more load. And so you see an increase in that pricing. And that's a very consistent shape throughout the year, quite frankly. But you can see it's a little bit more pronounced in the evening costs in the winter months. And this is just sort of a typical box plot of min-maxes and medians. The one thing I'll highlight on this page, so this is January, February, and March. February is an interesting month. It's not that February is actually as a month characteristically so different from January or March, although March, things tend to soften a little bit because things start to warm up. But, between January and February, the temperatures tend to be pretty similar. We have just happened to see this year, as already noted, we had that really strange cold snap in February. And then in 2014, which actually isn't captured in the slide, but in 2014, we had a really extreme February polar vortex as well that just really drives up energy prices. And so I just wanted to show this as a reflection of this is the type of risk and volatility you have to manage through when you go and hedge. Your load can increase significantly in those types of cold snaps, and your pricing, of course, can increase significantly. These are outlier type conditions. We don't typically see this, of course, but with more extreme weather conditions, this is the type of risk that we face, right? Is in February, this is just on average, you can see the kind of the spread of things, right? And this is really all driven by 2021's odd sort of cold February, and that had specific impacts in Texas, where you see this type of outlier pricing in the multi-$100 range, getting up to that $1,000 range even. The average, of course, is a lot lower. And if you look at the other 3 years, 2017, 18, 19, and 20, 4 years, sorry, those levels are much, much more modest. But just wanted to give you a sense of how, what kind of volatility we can see in those winter months. Just one more slide here. The last slide here, I think this is a slide that we've seen before, though there have been some updates to this graph. This reflects our hedge levels. So this is for 2022 and 2023. And this includes a breakdown of the blue bar, which is our direct contracted hedges, and then the orange bar, which reflects the Pcia hedge effectiveness. Right, this is where we've done quite a bit of analysis looking at PG&E's stranded cost resources to determine what do those provide us as a hedge, and incorporated that into our looking at our overall risk management analysis. And we're in this sort of 90 to 100 plus range when you account for that Pcia throughout 2022. So we are well hedged, but there is a lot of energy price volatility that we're seeing. One of the things that I would just highlight here is that, when we think about the last topic that we had on the agenda, talking about Pcia and the forecast and true-up methodology, it's important that we have some exposure to the market to allow us to account for the Pcia going up or down, because the Pcia goes up or down based off of energy market prices. And if you don't have some open position to allow for you to capture that Pcia volatility up or down, then you would have to hedge, closer to the 100% level just off of third-party contracts. And then you would consider then your Pcia hedges really make you take a very, very long position. And when you take a very, very long position, you really want your energy costs to increase, because that means you're over hedging and you're betting that power prices don't come down. So we have a balanced approach here where, a little more than half, we're talking about kind of 50, 60, certainly in Q3 months where we tend to want to be more hedged, in the 70% range where we are directly contractually hedged. And then we have some open market position for the year, but that are well hedged through the Pcia mechanism year to year. This is the last slide. I know I went through that very quickly, but I know some of those slides are ones that you have seen in the past. So I will stop there for questions.
Thank you, Howard. Before I turn it over to my colleagues for questions, I'll ask if there's any citizen or that's observing that would like to ask questions before I close public comment on this.
I am not seeing any hands in public comments.
Okay, so I will go ahead and open up to my colleagues for any questions that they may have. Howard, I just have a couple questions. Refresh my memory. What does NP-15 mean?
NP-15 is the region that we supply power in. CAISO is broken up to SP-15, NP-15 as the primary energy pricing hubs. There's technically a ZP-16 as well, but really NP-15, SP-15 are the primary ones. Our prices are technically PG&E DLAP. DLAP stands for Default Load Aggregation Points. It's an aggregation of all the points within PG&E service territory, and that is the exact price we pay for serving our customers. NP15 is very closely correlated to PG&E DLAP because PG&E service territory tends to cover just about all of NP15, but not technically exactly the same. But when we show you energy prices in most of our FAT materials, it's almost always NP15. That's the most liquid point, and that's where everyone, all the third-party providers provide energy price forecasts. That tends to be on an NP15 basis.
As I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you showed us a map of California and the different regions, and we're in that area of NP15. Is that my understanding?
That's correct. All those little dots, I think that's the one you're picturing. Those are all different P nodes, and you aggregate a bunch of them for a specific region. And the one we're talking about is NP15.
I will say again, and I'm looking forward to seeing the projected energy cost to our customers later this year, early next year, because I'll be honest with you, with the increased cost of energy, I'm really concerned about what that might translate in terms of our customers. And I'm specifically concerned about, low-income residents, senior citizens, folks that can least afford significant increased costs in energy. And it sounds like we're headed towards that possibility early next year. Are my assumptions correct?
I think that's right. I mean, there's obviously, as we know, there's two components of that. There's the T&D costs, and then there's the energy procurement costs. And obviously, we are only on the energy procurement cost piece of it. In a typical residential bill, and I'm just going really back on the envelope for you. They may pay the energy costs tend to be a much smaller proportion of that bill. An overall bill may be $100 a month. $150 a month, just depending on your energy consumption, of course, and the size of your family and your house, and everything like that. Your energy procurement costs tend to be about a third of that.
Okay.
And so they're a much smaller percentage of an overall bill. And so what we're talking about, when I said earlier, you see historical rates in that sort of 10 to 12 cent range, and we're talking about prices going up to maybe the 14 cent range. That is meaningful to 2 cents, on top of 12 cents. But we're talking about sort of a 10-15% increase. And so when you account for the wholesale energy costs on a bill, maybe anywhere between $30 and $60, that gives you a sense of we're talking about probably $10 increase in bill just for the energy procurement costs. That is a gross simplification and average, of course, across different customer bases, but just gives you a rough sense order of magnitude of what they're experiencing in this situation.
No, and I appreciate that. And Howard, you used the term, and this was my last question, you used the term capacity constraints. When I hear that, I'm thinking of the limited sources of energy to which we can draw from, whether it be solar, wind, things of that nature. Is that what you're referring to in terms of our constraints?
I am. When I say capacity, I mean generating units that can deliver energy, whether it be renewables like solar, wind, geothermal, whether that be large hydro, whether that's nuclear or natural gas. All of these different types of generated technologies create capacity for us, or resource adequacy. And that is generation plants that are able to deliver energy to the grid. And when I say there's capacity constraints, what I'm speaking to is perhaps in a hot summer month like in August, when everyone is cranking their AC at 7 p.m. when they're back from work. If you turn on every unit you have in the state to generate energy, you're putting yourself at risk that you may not be able to meet that load.
And I think that's an important point, Howard. And I know that we had this discussion a few years ago when the notion of nuclear energy, for example, came up. And I know that there's a number of CCAs that still to this day purchase nuclear energy as part of their energy stream. And I believe San Jose is one of them, for example, in our area. And certainly I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. But I think that's one thing we as a board need to just be mindful of in terms of when we start to limit the sources of energy at the end of the day, that is going to impact our capacity constraint, at which point is going to affect our customers in one way or another. And I just think it's something that I think the board is, staff has done a real good job of explaining to us some of the issues associated with limited capacity in terms of energy sources. I just think it's something we need to continue to keep an eye on as we move forward, because at the end of the day, what our customers want to make sure is that those lights turn on and the air conditioning turns on, and they're not always concerned about where that energy is coming from. Something just to consider. Any comments on that?
I would say that's right. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to meet our load needs and we want to manage our price risk and our financial risk. And I think good ways to mitigate that are to try to diversify our technology as much as possible, because diversification obviously helps you minimize that risk. As it relates specifically to something like nuclear, that is actually a driver for why costs are projected to increase in the coming years. Diablo Canyon is expected to continue to be online until the 2024 to 2025 timeframe, and then it will come offline. And so I will note that there's a lot of risk that the industry highlights in terms of that 2024 to 2025 timeframe, when such a significant percentage of generation comes offline. I know nuclear is not a popular topic, of course, so I'm not taking a position that we should do anything differently on that, but that is absolutely technology-related risk and power price risk that we need to be aware of. And that's part of what has driven many orders to go and require load serving entities to procure new capacity in the market in the next few years, is to try to address that risk. But it is risk in the market that we see.
Right, and to staff's credit and to energy source credit, we are looking at alternative energy sources, whether it be, wind right off the coast and things of that nature. So we are looking at opportunities, and we don't know what those costs will be at the end of the day, but at least I appreciate the fact that we are looking at alternative energy sources to make up that energy, the loss of energy in a number of other areas. So those are my questions. Board members, any other comments or questions? Again,
I think I'm generally good. I guess I will make a comment as a follow-up to your comments, Director Hannan. Certainly one of the concerns that I hear at our city is that as we're moving towards electrification, is there going to be sufficient capacity to handle that? As an example, we're looking at adopting all new construction has to be electric, so no natural gas. So that that's going to put more load on, just simplistically, and the question that's being asked is, is there going to be electricity to turn the lights on when people come home from work? And I do think, we're trying to plan for that, but I think it's something that, we need to keep in mind as we move towards, or we move away from the natural gas, that we're able to meet those electric needs.
thank you for that comment. Well, if there are no other comments, I think the last item on the agenda is any board member comments. And well, first of all, Howard, are there any final comments that you have regarding any item?
I don't have any additional comments. The only thing that I would just re-raise is, I know we had deferred on the minutes, and obviously we did not have a new member join. So my assumption is that we're going to push that to the next FAT meeting, but I did just want to raise it and make sure that was.
Yes. Yes, that'll be the first item then on the next FAT meeting. And Nick, thank you for joining us today. Certainly your presence is always appreciated. And again, I thought staff did an outstanding job of presenting the material today. Staff, are there any, or I'm sorry, board members, are there any other items that you want to see this staff prepare for the future? Are there any items that you would like to see further discussion on for our next meeting, which, Howard, can you remind me when our next meeting? I think it's in January.
The next meeting is actually in February. I know that Adrian had been working with folks to try to finalize that schedule, and I believe it is Friday, February 18th from 10 to 12.
Yes.
I think that will be the standing meeting, Fridays 10 to 12 every other month, generally speaking, and the first one would be February for 2022.
Great. So I'll look to my colleagues if there's any item that you would like added to that agenda, either communicate it now or feel free to communicate it with staff. I would ask if you do so, maybe do so within 30 days of the meeting so they have plenty of time to prepare any information that they may need to prepare in anticipation of that request. Is that reasonable? Howard?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. If there are no other suggestions or comments,
I do have a comment. I'm sorry.
yes, no, go ahead.
Howard, please thank Doug for his presentation. I didn't realize he was going to drop off, and I thought he did a really good job of simplifying a very complex subject that certainly I'm naive about. So please
Great.
convey at least my thanks.
I will absolutely do that. He's been a great resource for us, a great addition to the team. So yes.
And I guess the other comment maybe I would make is that the $60 million savings in Hedge, I think it's pretty good and actually very good. And certainly the staff members working on that are more than paying for themselves in the money that they're saving by hedging. So I think that's really worth noting as well.
And you did a fine job as board clerk today, Howard. Not nearly as good as Adrian would have done it, but in all seriousness, please make sure you give him our best. He's been an outstanding employee, certainly has done great work in terms of servicing the committee, and we certainly appreciate that. And we just hope that whatever ails him, that he gets better quick and we see him soon.
I will certainly pass that along. Thank you.
Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and thank you for your attendance today. And again, thanks, Howard, and thanks, Nick.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.